Namaste everyone. Welcome to another session of Indic Studies Toronto. Thank you for coming for this presentation. Today our topic is social inclusion of Dalits and women in Hinduism. And we have the privilege of having Prerna Thiruvaipati ji, a former banker from New Zealand, as our speaker. She is an Indic researcher and she works at grassroots level to fight against religious conversions and SC/ST atrocities, especially against women and children. So welcome Prerna ji, please continue.
Namaste, thank you very much for having me on Indic Studies. Before I begin, I just want to pay my obeisances to my Guru Sri Tidandi Chinajir Swami Varu. He's the one who's actually guided me through this research paper. And a small disclaimer is this research paper deals with the Tenkalai Sampradaya of the Sri Vaishnavas. So before we go further into this, I'd just like to clarify that the word Dalit is, as we all know, there are quite a few learned elders over here. So before I continue, also please pardon me if there are any mistakes from my side. So the caste system is foreign to, the word caste itself is a foreign word. It derives from the Portuguese word casta. And the word Dalit is a fairly modern political term, which was coined during the time of Jyotiba Phule. And we have always had Varna and Jati. And since everybody is quite fairly aware about the Varna and Jati system over here, I will not delve too much into it. These slides are pretty self-explanatory. But what I'd like to say about the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya, specifically the Tenkalai sect. So in the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya, we have the Tengalai and the Vadgalai. So the only difference between the Tengalai and Vadgalai is their philosophy or their concept. So there's a Markata and Marjala Marga, Bhakti Marga. And the thing with the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya is one of the chief proponents of the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya, Bhagavad Ramanuja, was the one who gave us all these teachings, and his hagiography specifically is very important to all of us. The hagiographic text regarding the life of Bhagavad Ramanuja is what we have used in this research. And the beauty of the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya is it's a genius system designed as a dissoluble tie, and it continues till date. So as we go further into the presentation, I will be presenting to you modern examples of where the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya till date is fighting or is empowering women and the Dalit community at large. Even though I do not like using the word Dalit per se, but for this seminar, we will be using that word, unfortunately. For the lack of a better word. The word that Bhagavad Ramanuja had actually coined for the Dalit community was Tirukuratal. Tirukuratal means people who are, divine. That was the word Bhagavad Ramanuja had actually used for the depressed and oppressed classes, Tirukuratal. So the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya, as we all know, is based on the teachings of the 12 Alvars who together compiled the 4,000 verses which we have today. We do it as the Nalayara Divya Prabandham. So apart from discussing the Alvars, my main focus over here will be Bhagavad Ramanuja and how his teachings are continuing and helping us to date. The incredible contributions that Bhagavad Ramanuja did towards the temples, towards the women, and towards the oppressed classes. I'll be also stating examples of the various temples in the two Telugu-speaking states where I come from, the Telangana and the Andhra region, where Bhagavad Ramanuja's legacy still continues. And also, a lot of people are unaware that Bhagavad Ramanuja had a lot of female disciples who were actually scholars in their own right. Mostly in the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya, out of the 12 Alvars, the only female Alvar, Andal's work is highlighted the most. the Tirupavai, especially during the Dhanurmasam. But there are also other female scholars who also belong to the depressed and oppressed classes, who were disciples of Bhagavad Ramanuja, of Manavala Mamuni, one of the other acharyas of the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya. So in the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya, specifically in the Tenkalai sect of the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya, it is considered a great sin to ask anybody their caste, because as Sri Vaishnavas, you're supposed to be indulging only in the Bhagavad Seva rather than the Bhagavad Seva, as in the Seva of the devotees of Lord Sriman Narayana is considered to be the utmost Seva, form of Seva, apart from the Seva of your acharyas, parents, society, etc. So in Sanatana Dharma, we have come to realize that there were so many great people other than Bhagavad Ramanuja. There were the other two mathas. So from the three mathas, we have Bhagavad Ramanuja, Shankaracharya, Bhagavad Pada Shankaracharya, and Madhvacharya, the three Sampradayas. And all of them did their best to help the oppressed and depressed classes learn about bhakti and lead them towards the margam of bhakti. Bhagavad Ramanuja, as you can see in the slide here, the Tirukuratal meaning of the word is born divine. What Bhagavad Ramanuja actually taught during his lifetime, he walked the talk, he implemented all his teachings in his day-to-day activities. Starting off with some of the disciples of Bhagavad Ramanuja who belonged or to the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya, I will state three examples of Shudra disciples. So Bhagavad Ramanuja's direct disciple, Dhanurdasa, belonged to the Shudra community. And he was one of Bhagavad Ramanuja's closest disciples. And a lot of people are unaware, the people behind the framing of the thought process of Bhagavad Ramanuja were his acharyas, be it Goshtipurna or be it Yamunacharya. The acharyas of Bhagavad Ramanuja were the ones who actually framed his thinking and inspired him. So there is one specific incident of Marineri Nambi, who was a disciple of Yamunacharya, and he was the Guru Brata, or the brother disciple of Bhagavad Ramanuja's Guru, Goshtipurna. So Marineri Nambi and Goshtipurna, as the disciples of Yamunacharya, inspired Bhagavad Ramanuja throughout his life. Marineri Nambi belonged to the Shudra community and Goshtipurna was a Brahmin. But it was Goshtipurna who actually performed the last rites or the Charma Samskara of Marineri Nambi. Being a Brahmin, he performed the last rites of Marineri Nambi. And coming to another Acharya, very famous Acharya of the Tenkalai Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya, is Manavala Mamuni. Manavala Mamuni's Guru belonged to the oppressed class, and his name was Villant Cholai Pillai. And as we all know, this is quite disputed regarding the Alvars, but my Acharya, His Holiness Chinnajira Swami Varu, considers 4 Alvars to come under the Shudra community. That's Tirumalaisai Alvar, Nama Alvar, Tirumangai Alvar, and Tirupan Alvar. So this is a little bit about the disciples of Bhagavad Ramanuja who belong to the Shudra community. Apart from this, Bhagavad Ramanuja had actually entrusted the temple management to who we call today as the Maladasaris and the Madhikadasaris. Now this continuity is there till date. Till date we have. So I'm stating examples of a few temples here in Telangana and Andhra. We have the Channakeshwara temple in Macherla in the Palanadu region of Andhra Pradesh, where the Archaka Swamis to date are Maladasaris. They belong to the same 14 families of Maladasaris who were appointed by Bhagavad Ramanuja back then in the 8th and 9th century itself. And another interesting fact about the Chennakeshwara temple in Macherla in Andhra Pradesh is Brahma Naidu was an army chief and a minister of the court in the court of King Nalagama Raju of the Palanadu kingdom. And he started this ritual, a temple ritual, a proper temple ritual known as Sapakudu, where the entire village gathers together, irrespective of caste or gender. They sit together and share a meal. So that Sapakudu ritual that was started in the 12th century by Brahma Naidu, who was a Sri Vaishnava and a follower of Vishishtadvaita, propagated by Bhagavad Ramanuja, had started this Sapakudu, excuse me, and it continues till date. There is another temple here in Andhra Pradesh known as Uppuluru Chennakeshwara temple in West Godavari district. This is about 100 kilometers away from the capital city of Andhra Pradesh, Amravati. It is an 800-year-old temple where till date Maladasaris are the archakas. After the Battle of Palanadu in 1178 to 1182, 9 families of Maladasulus started taking care of this temple. And Kannadadasu was adopted as a son by Brahma Naidu, the minister of the Palanadu kingdom. And from his lineage, Maladasus actually, they generated. And it was Tiruvidi Dasu who protected the idol of Chennakeshwara temple from the invaders. Vidi Krishnamurti Dasu, who belongs to the generation of Tiruvidi Dasu, was actually awarded the Harijan Archaka Award in 1996 by President Shankar Dayal Sharma. And there is another temple here in Andhra known as the Kurumurti Swami temple in Mehboob Nagar in Ammapur village in Chintakunta, which was built in 1350 CE. It is about 630 years old. There we have a temple ritual known as the Uddala Seva, or the festival of the footwear of Bhagwan. It is the Madiga Dasaris and the Madiga community who actually prepared the Padukas, and they undertake a very strict Anushtanam procedure, which lasts for a month when they are preparing the Padukas for Bhagwan, also known as Uddalas. And they follow all the procedures like, a single meal, sattvic meals, bathing twice a day and praying twice a day, etc. So we see that continuity even here in Telangana. And also a very famous temple of Telangana where Bhagavad Ramanuja's teachings continue to date is Bhadrachalam, Sri Ramanarayana temple. It is the only temple, in my knowledge at least, where Maladasaris are appointed as an endowment government employees. They have a post as well as a salary there. And we have something called the prasadam, the dasari vata of the prasadam. So every time there is prasadam in the temple, we have something called as a dasari vata, which still exists today. Also another interesting fact, Bhagavad Ramanuja's disciples actually carried on his legacy even after him. The first Telugu biography of Bhakt Ramadasu, who was the one who actually who played a major role in constructing the temple of Bhadrachalam. His biography was written by a Maladasari whose name was Singari Dasu. He wrote Bhakt Ramadasu's biography in Telugu. Also, the Haridasus and the Maladasaris along with the Madiga Dasaris together were known as Haridasus. And they used to go around all the vidis or all the areas of the village, spreading the message of Bhagavad Ramanuja in the form of songs and songs of bhakti. That also continues till date. And it was a very big part of the bhakti movement. it continued during the freedom struggle, and it happens even today. In fact, there is another interesting story about the Bhadrachalam temple, where the Mala and the Madhika Dasris played an important role. During the rule of the Nizam, after the Tanasha, who were patrons of the Bhadrachalam temple, after them, there was a Nizam whose army chief was known as Dhamsa. Dhamsa had actually attacked the Bhadrachalam temple and ransacked it. Mala Dasaris used to secretly go through the forests, collect supplies, food, grains, dry grains, etc., and from the ST community who dwelled in the forest, and they secretly kept the temple functioning despite the Nizam's rule. And this is all documented there in Bhadrachalam temple in the form of sashanams, or inscriptions, temple inscriptions. All the Mala Dasaris and Madhika Dasaris actually undergo the Samashnam or the Pancha Samskara. So they have the Shanku Chakra on their shoulders, cauterized by their acharyas. And they also wear the kunal or the janjam or the sacred thread. And they follow a very strict vegetarian sattvic diet where onions and garlics are not included. I've actually had the the blessing of meeting some of these Mala and Madhika Dasaris in Palanadu region during my research. Their children still continue to be archakars in the temple, and this is the 10th generation continuing there in Uppaluru as well as Palanadu's Macherla temple. Another interesting fact is our Chief Minister from erstwhile Andhra, Damodaram Sanjeevayya, belonged to the Mala Dasu community. And now coming to the women scholars. So there were several women scholars during the time, other than Andal, of course, Andal or Goda Devi. She was a very, very young girl. She got married to Perumal at the age of 14 or 16. Her age is disputed, but she was very young. And during that young age itself, she wrote some wonderful works, part of the Naraya Divya Prabandham. Apart from Andal, we also have Dhanurdasa's wife. So as we had discussed, Dhanurdasa was one of the disciples of Bhagavad Ramanuja. And Bhagavad Ramanuja's disciple Dhanurdasa's wife was also a scholar. Her name in Tamil is Pon Nachiyar and Kanakamba in Sanskrit. So Pon Nachiyar had also undertaken some ashram from Bhagavad Ramanuja. Husband and wife, Dhanurdasa and his wife Kanakamba, had undergone the Pancha Samskara. They had taken Diksha from Bhagavad Ramanuja. And also there was Atula, who is the daughter of Periyanambi, who was the guru of Bhagavad Ramanuja. Bhagavad Ramanuja's guru Periyanambi's daughter Atula was also a great devotee and a scholar in her own right. It was in Atula's house that Bhagavad Ramanuja's another disciple, Dasarathi, who was a Brahmin of a high caste, served as her household help on the direction of Bhagavad Ramanuja. Another disciple of Bhagavad Ramanuja was Kurotalwan. His wife was also a scholar, and she specialized in Andal's literature. Another very interesting thing about a elderly widow who was known as Amman Garu. We found these inscriptions in Alvar Tirunagari, where it is said that Tiruvaimoli Pillai, who was an acharya in the 13th century, had appointed Amman Garu, a widow, as the temple admin. She was a temple administrator, the non-religious temple administrator. So she looked after the finances and everything else. So women were given equal opportunity in the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya, they were allowed to chant the Pranavam. So back then there was a lot of controversy regarding women undertaking Diksha, and it still continues today whether women can actually pronounce or chant the Pranavam or the Om. So one of the great acharyas of Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya of the 13th century, Pillai Lokacharya, authored a book known as Tattvatrayam. In Tattvatrayam, he clearly mentioned that all women are allowed to chant the Ashtakshari mantra, Om Namo Narayanaya, the Ashtakshari mantra with the Pranavam. In his lifetime, Pillai Lokacharya authored 18 books, and he quoted from the Narayana Upanishad. So none of the acharyas belonging to the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya, be it Bhagavad Ramanuja or the ones who followed him or the ones before him, they never went against any Shastras. They always stuck to the Shastras and always quoted the Shastras and found their answers to all their questions within our Shastras. So there was nothing that they had invented or reinvented. One book by Pillai Lokam Jiyar of the 16th century, the Sri Vaishnava Samayachara Nishkarsha, was a very pro-feminist book. In fact, it was in this book where widows who used to shave their head back then were forbidden. So the practice called the Mundanam was condemned strongly by Pillai Lokam Jiyar in the 16th century. And he also directed his disciples and women belonging to the Sri Vaishnava Tenkalai Sampradaya to start wearing the Sri Churnam. Even if they are widows, they have to wear the Sri Churnam because it is part of our daily Anushtanam process. And that continues to date as well. So in the 11th century, the Yajnavalkya Smriti and the Nitakshara commentary by Vijnanandishwara talked about the Anumarana Prakaranam or Sati. Pillai Lokacharya in the 16th century refuted this book and wrote the Sri Vaishnava Samachara Nishkarsha, where he banned Siromundanam and promoted the use of Sri Churnam. The only thing that he didn't talk about in this book is probably remarriage, because I guess during that Desha Kala and Parasthiti, that subject didn't come up or it wasn't relevant. So the only thing that he didn't talk about was probably remarriage or widow remarriage. Otherwise, he had covered everything else. There are a lot of people who say that women are not allowed to chant Om, Pranavam, cannot read the Vedas. So instead of the Vedas, what we have in the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya is the Nalayara Divya Pramadam, which is known as the Tamil Vedas. Anybody, irrespective of caste, creed, gender, can read this verses from the Nalayara Divya Prabandham, which are considered as the Tamil Vedas. And another thing regarding Sandhya Vandanam. In the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya, we have something known as the Prapanna Gayatri. The Prapanna Gayatri is nothing but Ramanuja's Nutrandadi. And the Ramanuja's Nutrandadi is considered the Sri Vaishnava's Gayatri. So men, women, children, irrespective of caste and creed, can perform Sandhya Vandanam and chant the Prapanna Gayatri, which is Bhagavad Ramanuja's Nutrandadi. This Bhagavad Ramanuja's Nutrandadi started during the lifetime of Bhagavad Ramanuja. So he lived for 120 years, Bhagavad Ramanuja. And during those 130 years, he had already started, the deification of Bhagavad Ramanuja started during his lifetime itself. And Ramanuja Nutrandadi has been coming down from that time, and it continues to date. So most of the things that Bhagavad Ramanuja had taught and practiced himself still continue till date. Unbroken Guru Sampradaya or Guru Parampara that is going on till date. A little bit more I would like to add is Bhagavad Ramanuja was also responsible for re-establishing and spreading the Sri Vaishnava sampradaya, the entire lineage. What he did was he established a congregation of 700 sannyasis and 74 mathas or branches. These branches and mathas are still in existence today. Thousands of men and women and devotees and sishyas congregate at these mathas, and this is how the legacy of Bhagavad Ramanuja and his Purvacharyas continues even today. As I work on the ground, and I work with a lot of the people belonging to the depressed and oppressed communities, to the Dalit community, there is an increase, there's a major increase in the politicization, especially the Christian politicization in Andhra and Telangana. Where Bhagavad Ramanuja's teachings actually help me is in bringing them back in Ghar Vapsis. In performing Ghar Vapsis, few of these examples that we're able to state. So there is a major misconception in the Dalit community that they are not allowed temple entry, or women are not given the same respect as men, etc. But when we quote examples of Bhagavad Ramanuja and also make them understand that irrespective of gender or caste, Hinduism has given equal opportunity to all devotees. And that is why Pillai Lokacharya had very clearly stated that asking a devotee or a Bhagavata their caste is equivalent to going to your mother and asking her who your father is. It is considered the most heinous thing to do, ask somebody their caste. So that is forbidden in the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya. And anybody who undertakes some Vaishnam or who has an Acharya and they undergo the Pancha Samskara, their Gotra becomes Ramanuja Gotram. So even when so a lot of Sri Vaishnavas, in Tenkale Sri Vaishnavas, get prayers done on their Acharya's name. They don't get prayers done on their name. So when we go to the temple and you're getting some Archana done or you're getting some puja done, it's never done on your name. Most of them prefer getting it done on your Acharya's name, because if the Acharya is healthy, happy, and safe, then all of us are also happy and protected and safe. So we normally get it done on Acharya's name. And the Gotram that if anybody asks us is please. I can see that you raise my hand. Social inclusion, how to get rid of this caste system. So how to get rid of caste system? That's a really interesting question. And the answer is bhakti, the marga of bhakti. The bhakti marga is one of the simplest and the easiest to follow. Anybody can go for it. What we use on the ground while performing Ghar Vapsis is, so the Christians usually say that, you're born a sinner and you've died for your sins. And Jesus has died for your sins. Whereas in Sanatana Dharma, we believe that everybody is born pure. It's your karma, your papa or punya that decides how your fate is going to be. Karma is going to affect, based on the good or the bad. So it's a very simple procedure that we use on the ground to bring back Christians specifically is, you're not a sinner. As it is, they belong to the Dalit community. They already have inferiority complex. On top of it, the weight of being, a sinner adds to that inferiority complex as well. So instead, if you tell them that, you come back to Hinduism, you get your Shuddhi done, it's a new life. Sure, I can see that somebody has raised their hand.
You can finish your presentation. We'll do the QA after your presentation.
Ji. So just before I conclude, is Bhagavad Ramanuja's teachings help me a lot on the ground while performing Ghar Vapsis for the Dalit community. We state examples of all the Dalits who are still in existence today in Andhra and Telangana, the Mala and the Madhika Dasaris, and also all the women who are acharyas, who in their own right were highly educated, had a very strong hold on the Shastras. So when we quote examples like this, the chances of somebody returning back to Hinduism, because they have been told a lot of, they have been fed a lot of lies, a lot of black lies and hate filled speeches. They keep hearing it in their church during their Sunday church meetings. That and Dasama Bhagam. These are the two things which is a problem with the Christian community, that the Dalit community, as it is, they are poor, they're below poverty line, and they have to pay Dashama Bhagam or Teth. And that Teth, if they don't pay, then they get ostracized in the church. This we see across the board. There are no free lunches anywhere, be it church or any Abrahamic faith. There are absolutely no free lunches there. And a lot of people who convert to Christianity don't realize the problem of this Teth. Once they get into it and they are unable to pay that Teth in the church on a Sunday, then they get ostracized with the rest of the congregation. Whereas in the Bhakti Marga, you don't have any of these burdens. You're not a sinner. First of all, there's no psychological burden of being a sinner. And also there's no financial burden of paying Teth or anything like that. Anybody can come into a Sri Vaishnava temple, offer your prayers, and you can partake prasadam across. So we have 106 temples belonging to the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya, the Divya Deshams. People of any caste and creed or gender can go offer their prayers over there. And this is something that was ordained by Bhagavad Ramanuja himself. So that's probably that's my presentation. If anybody has any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Thank you, Prerna ji. We'll start the question and answer. Please raise your hands to ask a question. Please keep your questions short and please no political questions. So Yashwant Maharaj ji, please go ahead.
Hello, namaskar to everybody. This was a very good topic. My question may be to the entire participants. This Dalit community and that whatever we are calling, that in my view, that's how we can get rid of in current modern situation from India, because I see that there is only way to progress India is the end of the caste system. So what is the answer for that? How we can merge the entire people in a humanity based on our principles of Sanatana Dharma? How we can do that?
So if I may answer that, the thing is, that is already happening in the temples. There are very, very, very few temples where Dalit community is not allowed. And that happens only in extreme rural areas. I've not seen that happening anywhere in the city. I travel across the Telangana and Andhra region. So I have personally not come across many cases where Dalits are not allowed into the temples. So you cannot blame the entire Sanatana Dharma for just a few odd places. The thing is, it has to be a government initiative to end this caste system or this caste discrimination. Right now, caste is being used as a political tool for vote bank politics. So once they remove the caste thing from the government papers, educational documents and stuff like that, I think that's when it will end. Once the reservation system and the caste system, the mentioning of the caste system in all your documents, once that ends, once the government takes that initiative, I think that's the only way we can stop it. Otherwise, there's no other way.
Sanjay Verma ji, please go ahead.
Yeah, Namaste Prerna ji. Thank you for this excellent presentation. My question, actually, I typed on the chat mode also. So, like I'm saying, I'm kind of confused as to when this breakdown in a Varna system, which was kind of a foolproof system, and it was a skill-based system, it became discriminatory at certain point in time. And like you mentioned, our sages, Ramanujam and others had to intervene. And at another point, you mentioned that, these solutions exist in our ancient text itself, and we don't need to look elsewhere. At the same time, like, there is some opinion as to the caste system was kind of, by overt or covert means introduced by the British to make the Hindu society divisive. So, like, I mean, I am kind of confused as to what's the source, and somebody aggressively pursued it, or how did it transpire? If you can explain, thank you.
In my limited knowledge, what I've come to realize is during the invasions, there was a lot of tax or jizya, especially during the Islamic invasion. It started during the Islamic invasion where Hindus had to pay a lot of jizya tax, or either they convert to Islam or they die. And also upper caste people, and this has been documented in several temples, including Tirumala Tirupati. So there's a fantastic book here by Tirumala Tirupati Devasthanam, which is written by Dr. N. Ramesan. I've got it right here, which says that anybody who had committed any crime back then would be considered an outcast. They would have to leave the village and go live on the outskirts of the village, and that's when the Panchama caste had actually started. So otherwise, we always had Brahmin, Vaishya, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra, and the Panchama Varna started when they started having outcasts. So earlier we used to have, according to the Manusmriti, punishments for anybody who was a criminal or was considered an outcast. An outcast basically meant somebody who had committed some heinous crime and was not allowed to live in civil society. So they had to go live outside the boundaries of the village, what we know in Telugu as Polimeru. So Polimeru Datali is the term that they used to use, and this has been documented in this book. So the Panchama Varna people, you either convert. So even after committing those crimes, or even having to pay the jizya tax, there were people who did not leave their religion, and hats off to all of them for sticking to Sanatana Dharma, no matter how tough the situations were. So I think during the invasions, because of the extreme pressure and forceful conversions, people actually, the caste system actually became even more rigid. The ones who didn't convert or who didn't die were considered the Panchama Varna. But then again, even before, there are two theories. So one is during the invasion, they started the Panchama Varna, and there's another theory that during the Gupta time, this Panchama Varna had started because they didn't believe in chopping a hand off, whatever is written in the Manusmriti. They didn't want to do that, so they would just tell the people to leave the cities outskirts. So the theory goes that after one generation, the child would not be considered an outcast. He would come back to his regular, right come duty, whatever it was, whether it was being a cobbler, a teacher, or whatever the responsibility would be.
Shubhangi ji, please go ahead.
Yeah, namaste, madam. Very good talk, and it has stirred, a lot of thoughts and there are so many questions in our mind right now. One thing I would like to specifically ask you is that the role of women were not recognized as a lead role in our society for a long time, but in our schools we read like the Times of Veda, from where we got references that there were very enlightened women in society. Why their role was not, why their role was not projected further? I mean, where was the barrier created? What is the times? I mean, timeline wise.
The thing is, I don't think we have actually read our text as much. I think it's us. We have to blame for not knowing about the great Rishikas, be it Lopamudra or Gargi or any of these Rishikas, or even Andal for that matter. Andal had written wonderful texts, and she was such a feminist. In fact, we don't even need to go as further back as the Rishikas from the Vedas. We can just look at Andal here, who lived during the 6th century. She was such a scholar. She knew Sanskrit as well as Tamil, and her books, even till today, they're a wonder. She was a literary genius or even a child prodigy, for that matter. So women were given equal right, and she was such a feminist that she chose to marry only Sri Ranganatha. She didn't want to compromise on who she had to marry. She chose to marry Lord Ranganatha of Srirangam, and she got married to him, no matter what. So I think that is feminism from the 6th century, that we don't need to look even further.
Baliji, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Premaji, thank you for the presentation. Very enlightening. I have 2 questions for you. I'm from the Caribbean community and not from the Indian community, so I'll speak from that angle. My first question is, isn't the elaborate ritual system a means that still reinforces the caste system? My second question is, isn't the lack of the pure and simple teaching of the philosophical truth in the dialogue of the common people reinforcing this caste system?
So the temple rituals that we have here in India specifically, they are incomplete without a certain section of the caste system. So I'll just state you an example of Tirumala TTD. The first person who gets a darshan of Bhagwan as soon as they open the shutters, the doors of the temple, belong to the Yadava community, the ones who are milkmaids and cowherds. Also, there are certain, like I had also stated about the Uddala Seva, where the Madhya community or the SC community stitches the leather slippers or shoes for Bhagwan. So there are certain rituals in a temple which are incomplete without every caste. So Bhagavad Ramanuja had done this wonderful thing. He was a great administrator. What he did as an administrator is he gave responsibility of certain rituals to each community so that there was social inclusion as a whole. So a temple could not function without all these communities coming together and working together. So rituals, yes, they do form a very integral part of our Sanatana Dharma, and for very good reason, because there is cultural continuity happening through those rituals. Everybody is reminded that they are also very important. And, in the Bhakti Marga, without the inclusion of everybody, as an equal, it cannot continue. So even till today, even in Tirupati, Tirumala temple, the Yadav community gets the first, glance of the Lord as soon as they open the doors. And also, like I had said, the rituals, they are temples of Chennakeshwara Perumal. The Archakas can only belong to the Mala or the Madhika Dasulu community.
Isn't the lack of the pure and simple teaching of the philosophical truth in the dialogue of the common people reinforcing the caste system? The lack of pure and simple teaching in the common dialogue of the common people is missing.
It's actually not. I think we've complicated it for ourselves, because it was Bhagavad Ramanuja who actually went onto a Gopuram and gave the Ashtakshari mantra to everybody who could hear him. It was as simple as that. At the end of the day, all of us are equal in the eyes of God. That was one simple teaching. If we had to summarize Bhagavad Ramanuja's entire life, apart from being a social reformer, temple administrator, and everything else, the one simple thing that he told all of us was, everybody is equal in the eyes of God. Everybody is eligible to chant this Ashtakshari mantra, irrespective of caste and gender. So I think we have complicated it for ourselves by delving into all the smritis and quoting from different shastras. The message has always been simple. Nobody can come between you and God. That has always been there. And Hinduism per se is very simple compared to the Abrahamic faiths, because it's your karma, the papa or the punya. Whatever you do, that's how your life is going to be. I think our teachings have always been simple, reinforcing caste, I don't think there was any acharya other than the, including the Trimathas, I don't think there was any acharya who actually propagated caste. We just see them now in today's day and age doing that. And that too, they do it for political reasons here in India.
Why are the Hindu rituals so complicated so that the common person cannot understand now in the modern age?
Rituals are not complicated per se. The Agama Shastras, the temple rituals are governed by the Agama Shastras. So I can speak about my Sampradaya because that's my subject of research. The Pancharatra or the Vaikhasana Agama Shastras is what we follow. And the rituals are very clearly listed out there. I had quoted the example of Bhadrachalam temple where Mala Dasari is appointed by the government to date, and he also gets a part of the prasadam called as the Dasari Vata or Dasari's share of the prasad. So these rituals were actually put in place by Bhagavad Ramanuja himself. So whether it was the Utsavams, the Brahmotsavam, or the way God has to be decorated, the Alankarana and everything has been clearly listed in our by Bhagavad Ramanuja, and it's already there in the Agama Shastras. And they're there for a reason, the cultural continuity.
You mentioned that in your groundwork, where you go from city to city, family to family, what are the drivers, for the Gharvapsi program, what are the drivers for people to convert to Islam or Christianity? And what are the, reasons for bringing them back, or they desire to come back, other than shunning in the church and all that?
So that's a really nice question. Thank you. So in my experience, my short experience here in India, I have realized that people convert, especially the poor community, or even the rich or the poor, doesn't matter. They convert under very vulnerable circumstances. It could be a health issue. It could be a financial problem. It could be, they think that they're possessed or something. It could be anything, just a vulnerable situation. It could be financial, psychological, physical. People who go and convert, they are like leeches. The minute they find, that a person is distressed or is in trouble, they go and the first thing they do is try to convert them. The most vulnerable of situations is when the conversion mafia comes and attacks any family. It could be a sick child or a sick husband. It could be anything. But they have to be in a vulnerable position. That's when they go and say that, and they use only two tricks. One is money, one is miracle. They say that, okay, you have somebody sick in the family, we'll pay for the treatment. And then Yesu Prabhu, will cure you with this water, Jesus Christ, this holy water or something like that. So money and miracle are the only two things that they use. We also use the same two things when we bring them back to Gharvapsi. One trope that they use is caste system, and women are not given equal rights. That's what they use. What we tell them is the religion of your ancestors, and this is something that really works with the BPL families, the below poverty line families, and people who are not very educated or financially stable and stuff like that. Because if you're educated, at least that reasoning power and everything will be there. You'll question it. So these people are quite naive, I might say. They're quite naive. And what we say is, when we are doing the Gharvapsi or we are attempting to do a Gharvapsi, we tell them the religion of your ancestors is Sanatana Dharma, or the Marga is Sanatana Dharma. Why are you going and calling the next door's person as your dad? When you have a dad of your own who's alive and kicking, why are you calling your neighbor's father your father? So you should have some integrity. And another thing that we use, money, is a lot of this SC and ST community don't realize that the Indian government, and I have to applaud them for it, the Indian government gives a lot of even though reservation system, there's a contested topic again, reservation, but there are a lot of schemes that the government provides to the SC and the ST community. When they go and become Christians, they, according to our constitution and law, they fall under the BCC. They are no longer SC or ST. They come under the category of backward caste Christian, BCC. So they are no more eligible for any government aid or financial aid from the government's side. So if their children want to get higher education, or if they need to get a job in the government or anything like that, if you convert to Christianity or to any other religion, you lose that SC/ST status. So that is something we explain to them. In fact, another great thing about our government is 30,000 rupees is given out to celebrate Ambedkar's birthday in any Ambedkar's Basti or Wada. A lot of people are not aware. 30,000 is a very big amount to be spent by a community for one day. So they can have like a pandal, they can have like a mic arrangement, everything, food and everything. And 30,000 is given by government aid to celebrate Ambedkar's Jayanti. So there are a lot of schemes that they lose out on. Also, the thing psychologically for them is the religion of their ancestors. They've abandoned it and they have gone to something which has come from the West, the Paschata Desham religion. So these two things commonly work. And the miracle thing is, because if the Christians say that, you pray to Jesus and he'll give you money. What we do is we go and give them the Lakshmi Ashtotra. If they're financially distressed, we give them the Lakshmi Ashtotra, and we tell all the ladies to gather together on a Friday and read the Ashtotra together and do the Kumkuma Archana. So we also use the same thing, money and miracle, and it works. But the thing is, there is transparency in Hinduism. We are not lying or cheating them that, this bottle of holy water is going to cure you.
Thank you, Samirji, and thank you, Prernaji. So I just wanted to kind of add to your point about Mr. Singh's question that Hinduism in itself, like the Bhakti Marga in itself, is sufficient to connect the individual to the Paramatma. So we may have rituals and traditions and like going on for ages or eons, I would say. However, if you don't have to follow them to reach Paramatma, right? Your bhakti in itself is sufficient to like take it to the God. So you may have this, but if you don't want to do it or don't want to follow a particular tradition or ritual, fine. You can continue to chant the name of the Lord or your deity, whoever it is. It's all the same. Yeah. Right. Yeah. That just wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for adding that, Ji.
Prernaji, do you also tell them about the atrocities committed on African slaves and the Native Americans?
Oh yes. The Christians, the amount that they have abused the indigenous population, be it New Zealand, Australia, Africa, anywhere, in the name of the Bible. There's a very famous quote. I think it's by I'm sorry, I don't remember, but they've given them the Bible and taken away their land. So in Sanatana Dharma, we don't have anything like this. And speaking of atrocity specifically on Hindus, Hindus are being attacked left, right, and center. Specifically, four things are under siege right now. One is our daughters, in the name of post-conversion, in the name of love and marriage, they are being converted. Second, our Gau Mata, so the cows are being stolen, and the beef mafia. So daughters, cows. Third is our temples. Temples are being ransacked and attacked every day in Andhra Pradesh specifically. And fourth is our sannyasis. Sannyasis are also, the keepers of our shastras and dharma, and those people are under attack as well. There are a list of sannyasis and people like that who are being attacked, specifically targeted by the conversion mafia. So these are the four atrocities that all Hindus face. Coming to the atrocities faced by the SC/ST community, that would be another seminar on its own. I could tell you a little bit about it, but it would take a little time.
Ravi ji, please go ahead.
Thank you for this opportunity. I just wanted to ask few things, because what I had come to know was the fact that the church was even sponsoring coffins and burials at discounted rates, like 50%. What have you done on the front of ritual, particularly the death rituals? And secondly, how have you found any religious figure that could parallel the nature of Christ, the Redeemer? Because you see, the nature of Christ is pretty, it's something that is very attractive to people of poor strata, because there is a notion of suffering. Have you ever considered that? How have you considered how to counter this thing?
Okay, so regarding the burials, not just the burials, there are different churches for different castes. So even after you leave Hinduism and you convert to Christianity, even now you have different castes for different communities. So you have a Kamma church, you have a Kapu church, you have a Reddy church, you have different churches. And also their burial, the cemeteries are different for different castes in Christianity. And this is something that villagers are very much aware about. We think that villagers are not aware or anything, because I work with them, during these atrocities. If you ask them for their Aadhaar card, ration card, yellow card, pink card, whatever government card, they have all their paperwork in order. They are quite aware of what, this, the thing that, their churches are different. So when you speak to them, the thing we need to do during Ghar Wapsi is actually speak to them and try and gauge about how much they know and how much they don't know. Most of the time that they are unaware. Almost 70% of the time they are unaware. And what happens is, once they die, not only is the funeral expensive, Christian funerals are expensive across the world. When I was working in New Zealand as a banker, there were funeral loans as well. People, the coffin costs this much, the palinders cost this much, the limousine for that costs this much. So they take loans even to cremate across the world. Here in India as well, the cemeteries are different for different castes. What we do is we explain to them why we actually perform the Charma Samskara, or why we we do the Dahana Samskara of our deceased. We explain to them. And most of them do understand. And another thing that I think I'm just repeating myself. The thing is, the thing about their ancestors also touches them a lot. Your ancestors, if they have like an older family member in the house, we tell them that, you're going to bury this person when they die in the cemetery. They are not going to reach moksham. At the end of the day, every Hindu, all they strive for is moksham or mukti. So we use the same thing that because they believe that they're going to rest in peace for the rest of their lives in that in that tomb or wherever, till the last judgment day, when Jesus will actually come and people will rise from the dead again and then clarify whatever they've done in their lifetime to Jesus. So until then, they're going to be miserable in their tombs, in their graves. So the thing is, these people don't really understand. It's not a theological war that we have with them when we are trying to reconvert them back to Hinduism. It's very simple things that touch their heart. I'll give you a small example. Women will be there. They'll not even wear a bindi or a sinduram. Their husband will be alive. He'll be standing right next to them. Purposely, we ask them, did your husband die? How are you raising your 3 children alone? That's a question I pose purposely. They'll be like, no, I'm married. My husband is very much alive. Look, that's my husband. I said, oh, you're not wearing a bindi. I assumed you were a widow. So that really touches them somewhere. That's the Indian psychology and the Indian thinking that actually hits them. If we are able to convert the woman in the house, then the rest of the family will fall in place. I've seen this in the last 5 years. I hope that I was able to answer that question.
I don't have a question, but I have a few comments. One was that, coming from a Arya Samaj background, and having been born and brought up in Africa, I didn't know very much about caste system. I've become more aware of it since settling in England. And what is shocking to me is that even after converting in communities like Goans, who are Christians, Sikhs, this caste system carries on and it's becoming worse. But it is tied up with their economic status, it's a very status thing. As people, becoming better economically, you find that they then want to keep other people down and themselves as being above them, almost like noble. And this is getting quite bad here. It's really shocking. So I think one is education through the temples, through our Hindu organizations. The other thing is the promotion of this thought. First and foremost, we are Hindus. Not this caste, not this thing, not that thing, not Gujarati, not that. Hindus. That is where the unity coming in. In India, I think by law, caste system should be forbidden. And you will find it'll take a little while, but eventually in the coming generations, that might kind of peter out. This is where the reservation system is very good, because as people get a chance to become educated, they're able to move, to get new jobs or whatever. So that is very important. And it's important to educate women first and foremost. We went to visit South India once, and the people that we stayed with were Christians. But the woman wore a sari, she wore a Mangal Sutra, she wore a bindi, and she was a Christian. And she had this attitude that she was above everybody else, all the other Hindus. And I was shocked to find that when we went to the local temple, because I was wearing trousers, I was not allowed to go into the temple because people said, oh, she's not Hindu. And we kept on saying, but we're Hindus, we're from Britain. No, you can't go into the inner sanctum. And yet this Christian woman who's wearing a Mangal Sutra and bindi said to me, I've been in the inner sanctum. What is this? Absolute nonsense, And so these sort of double standards, I think it's really through temples, this can be eradicated. Thank you very much for your presentation. I wanted to know a lot more about the caste system and that. It was a little bit confusing for me because you were talking about something, but your presentation, the written presentation, didn't match with that. So to start with, I didn't know whether to listen to you or whether to read that. And so I think I didn't get the best thing out of it, but I applaud the efforts that are being made now to, to decimate all this knowledge. Just an example of the Goan, some Goans who I met, and they were sitting separate from some other ladies, and I said, we were invited, they were not invited. And I said, why haven't you invited them? And this woman says to me, because we are upper caste Christian Goans. This is hundreds of years after they've been converted, and they're still using the caste system because it suits them, because they were Brahmins. It suits them to say that they are upper class because they are Brahmins, Brahmin Christians, if there is such a
several matrimony ads with that in the newspaper, matrimony ads. A tall Brahmin Christian boy looking for a fair Christian girl, Brahmin Christian girl. Those are the ads that come in the newspaper, alliances. You're right, that still happens. And I apologize because there are quite a few learned scholars over here attending this seminar, and most of them are already aware about this Varna, Jati and caste system. I just didn't want to keep repeating myself, that caste it derives from casta, which is a Portuguese term. Varna does not mean caste, and Jati is how we each of us originated. The from either from the egg or from the embryo and stuff like that. So my apologies. That's what the slides were about. But we later decided to state present-day examples of the continuity of Bhagavad Ramanuja's teachings. So my apologies for that.
Okay, I think Prernaji, we have run out of time. This is a very vast topic and we could talk forever, and it's very interesting, and we would like to laud you on your efforts to do Ghar Wapsi for so many people, and I would encourage the listeners to help Prernaji in her endeavor. Google her and you'll find out about her activities, and she has a lot of videos on YouTube regarding Dalits and conversion. So thank you, audience, for attending this session, and we'll look forward to attending the next one. And thank you, Prernaji, for presenting. Namaskar.
Thank you. Namaste. Jai Shri Narayana. Thank you.